Hello everyone. Today we are going to read the second part of our chapter 7, Women, Caste and Reform. Caste and Social Reform. Some of the social reformers we have been discussing also criticized caste inequalities. Ram Mohan Roy translated an old Buddhist text that was critical of caste. The Prarthana Samaj adhered to the tradition of bhakti that believed in spiritual equality of all castes. In Bombay, the Paramhans Mandali was founded in 1840 to work for the abolition of caste. Many of these reformers and members of reform associations were a people of upper caste. Often in secret meetings, these reformers would violate caste taboos on food and touch in an effort to get rid of the hold of caste prejudice in their lives. There were also others who questioned the injustices of the caste social order. During the course of the 19th century, Christian missionaries began setting up schools for tribal group and lower caste children. These children were thus equipped with some resources to make their way into a changing world. At the same time, the poor began leaving their villages to look for jobs that were opening up in the cities. There was work in the factories that were coming up and jobs in municipalities. You have read about the expansion of cities in chapter 6. Think of the new demands of labor this created. Drains had to be dug, roads laid, buildings constructed, and cities cleaned. This required coolies, diggers, carriers, bricklayers, sewage cleaners, sweepers, palanquin bearers, rickshaw pullers. Where did this labor come from? The poor from the villages and small towns, many of them from low caste, began moving to the cities where there was a new demand for labor. Some also went to work in plantations in Assam, Mauritius, Trinidad, and Indonesia. Work in the new locations was often very hard, but the poor, the people from lower caste, saw this as an opportunity to get away from the oppressive hold that upper caste landowners exercised over their lives and the daily humiliation they suffered. Who could produce shoes? Leather workers have been traditionally held in contempt since they work with dead animals which are seen as dirty and polluting. During the First World War, however, there was a huge demand for shoes for the armies. Caste prejudice against leather work meant that only the traditional leather workers and shoemakers were ready to supply army shoes. So they could ask for high prices and gain impressive profits. There were other jobs too. The army, for instance, offered opportunities. A number of Mahar people who were regarded as untouchable found jobs in the Mahar regiment. The father of B.R. Ambedkar, the leader of the Dalit movement, taught at an army school. No place inside the classroom. In the Bombay Presidency, as late as 1829, untouchables were not allowed into even government schools. When some of them pressed hard for that right, they were allowed to sit on the veranda outside the classroom and listen to the lessons without polluting the room where upper caste boys were taught. Demands for equality and justice. Gradually, by the second half of the 19th century, people from within the non Brahmin caste began organizing movements against caste discrimination and demanded social equality and justice. The Satnami movement in central India was founded by Ghasidas, who worked among the leather workers and organized a movement to improve their social status. In eastern Bengal, Haridas Thakur's Matua sect worked among Chandala cultivators. Haridas questioned Brahmanical texts that supported the caste system. In what is present day Kerala, a guru from Ezhava caste, Sri Narayan Guru, proclaimed the ideals of unity for his people. He argued against treating people unequally on the basis of caste differences. According to him, all humankind belong to the same caste. One of his famous statements was Oru Jati, Oru Matam, Oru Devam, Manushyanu. One caste, one religion, one God for humankind. All these sects were founded by leaders who came from non Brahmin caste and worked against them. They tried to change those habits and practices which provoked the contempt of dominant caste. They tried to create a sense of self esteem among the subordinate caste. Gulamgiri. One of the most vocal amongst the low caste leaders was Jyotirao Phule. Born in 1827, he studied in schools set up by Christian missionaries. On growing up, he developed his own ideas about the injustices of caste society. He set out to attack the Brahmins' claim that they were superior to others since they were Aryans. Phule argued that the Aryans were foreigners who came from outside to subcontinent and defeated and subjugated the true children of the country, those who had lived here from before the coming of the Aryans. As the Aryans established their dominance, they began looking at the defeated population as inferior, as low caste people. According to Phule, the upper caste had no right to their land and power. In reality, the land belonged to indigenous people, the so called low caste. Phule claimed that before Aryan rule, there existed a golden age when warrior peasants tilled the land and ruled the Maratha countryside in just and fair ways. He proposed that Shudras, laboring caste, and Ati Shudras, untouchables, should unite to challenge caste discrimination. The Satya Shodhak Samaj, an association Phule founded, propagated caste equality. Me here and you over there. Phule was critical of the anti-colonial nationalism that was preached by upper caste leaders. He wrote, "The Brahmins have hidden away the sword of their religion, which has cut the throat of the people's prosperity, and now go about posing as great patriots of their country." They give this advice to our Shudra, Muslim, and Parsi youth that unless we put away all quarreling amongst ourselves about the divisions between high and low in our country and come together, our country will never make any progress. It will be unity to serve their purposes, and then it will be me here and you over there again. Jyotiba Phule, the cultivator's whipcord. In 1873, Phule wrote a book named Gulamgiri, meaning slavery, Some 10 years before this, the American Civil War had been fought, leading to the end of slavery in America. Fule dedicated this book to all those Americans who had fought to free slaves, thus establishing a link between the conditions of the lower caste in India and the black slaves in America. As this example shows, Fule extended his criticism of the caste system to argue against all forms of inequality. He was concerned about the plight of upper caste women, the miseries of the laborer, and the humiliation of the low caste. This movement for caste reform was continued in the 20th century by other great Dalit leaders like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in Western India and E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar in the South. We are also human beings. In 1927, Ambedkar said, "We now want to go to the tank only to prove that, like others, we are also human beings." Hindu society should be recognized on two main principles: equality and absence of casteism. Who could enter temples? Ambedkar was born into a Mahar family. As a child, he experienced what caste prejudice meant in everyday life. In school, he was forced to sit outside the classroom on the ground and was not allowed to drink water from taps that upper caste children used. After finishing school, he got a fellowship to go to the US for higher studies. On his return to India in 1919, he wrote extensively about upper caste power in contemporary society. In 1927, Ambedkar started a temple entry movement in which his Mahar caste followers participated. Brahman priests were outraged when the Dalits used water from the temple tank. Ambedkar led three such movements for temple entry between 1927 and 1935. His aim was to make everyone see the power of caste prejudices within society. The non-Brahman movement. In the early 20th century, the non-Brahman movement started. The initiative came from those non-Brahman castes that had acquired access to education, wealth, and influence. They argued that Brahmins were heirs of Aryan invaders from the north who had conquered southern lands from the original inhabitants of the region, the indigenous Dravidian races. They also challenged Brahmanical claims to power. E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar, or Perrier as he was called, came from a middle class family. Interestingly, he had been an ascetic in his early life and had studied Sanskrit scriptures carefully. Later, he became a member of the Congress only to leave it in disgust when he found that at a feast organized by the nationalists, seating arrangements followed caste discrimination. That is, the lower caste were made to sit at a distance from the upper caste. Convinced that untouchables had to fight for their dignity, Perrier founded the self respect movement. He argued that untouchables were the true upholders of an original Tamil and Dravidian culture which had been subjugated by Brahmins. He felt that all religious authorities saw social divisions and inequality as God given. Untouchables had to free themselves, therefore, from all religions in order to achieve social equality. Perrier was an outspoken critic of Hindu scriptures, especially the codes of Manu, the ancient lawgiver, and the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana. He said that these texts had been used to establish the authority of Brahmins over lower caste and the domination of men over women. These assertions did not go unchallenged. The forceful speeches, writings, and movements of lower caste leaders did lead to rethinking and some self criticism among upper caste nationalist leaders. But Orthodox Hindu society also reacted by founding Sanatan Dharma Sabhas and the Bharat Dharma Mahamandal in the north and associations like the Brahman Sabha in Bengal. The object of these associations was to uphold caste distinction as a cornerstone of Hinduism and show how this was sanctified by scriptures. Debates and struggles over caste continued beyond the colonial period and are still going on in our own times. Perrier on women. Perrier wrote, only with the arrival of words such as Thara Mukhurtam, our women had become puppets in the hands of their husbands. We ended up with such fathers who advised their daughters that they had been gifted away to their husbands and they belonged to their husband's place. This is the result of our association with Sanskrit. Perrier cited in Perrier Chintanaikal. Organizing for reform. The Brahma Samaj formed in 1830 prohibited all forms of idolatry and sacrifice, believed in the Upanishads and forbade its members from criticizing other religious practices. It critically drew upon the ideals of religions, especially of Hinduism and Christianity, looking at their negative and positive dimensions. Derozio and Young Bengal. Henry Louis Vivian Derozio, a teacher at Hindu College, Calcutta in the 1820s, promoted radical ideas and encouraged his pupils to question all authority. Referred to as the Young Bengal movement, his students attacked tradition and custom, demanded education for women, and campaigned for the freedom of thought and expression. The Ramakrishna Mission and Swami Vivekananda. Named after Ramakrishna Paramhans, Swami Vivekananda's guru, the Ramakrishna Mission stressed the ideal of salvation through social service and selfless action. Swami Vivekananda, 1863 to 1902, whose original name was Narendra Nath Datta, combined the simple teachings of Sri Ramakrishna with his well-founded modern outlook and spread them all over the world. After hearing him in the World Parliament of Religions at Chicago in 1893, the New York Herald reported, "We feel how foolish it is to send missionaries to this learned nation." Indeed, Swami Vivekananda was the first Indian in modern times who re-established the spiritual preeminence of the Vedanta philosophy on a global scale. But his mission was not simply to talk of religion. He was extremely pained at the poverty and the misery of his countrymen. He firmly believed that any reform could become successful only by uplifting the condition of the masses. Therefore, his calorino call to the people of India was to rise above the narrow confines of their religion of the kitchen and come together in the service of the nation. By sending out this call, he made a signal contribution to the nascent nationalism of India. His sense of nationalism was, however, not narrow in its conception. He was convinced that many of the problems facing the mankind could only be overcome if the nations of the world come together on an equal footing. Therefore, his exhortation to the youth was to unite on the basis of a common spiritual heritage. In this exhortation, he became truly the symbol of a new spirit and a source of strength for the future. The Prarthana Samaj. Established in 1867 at Bombay, the Prarthana Samaj sought to remove caste restrictions, abolish child marriage, encourage the education of women, and end the ban of widow remarriage. Its religious meetings drew upon Hindu, Buddhist, and Christian texts. The Ved Samaj. Established in Madras, Chennai in 1864, the Ved Samaj was inspired by the Brahma Samaj. It worked to abolish caste distinctions and promote widow remarriage and women's education. Its members believed in one God. They condemned the superstitions and rituals of Orthodox Hinduism. The Aligarh Movement. The Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, founded by Syed Ahmad Khan in 1875 at Aligarh, later became the Aligarh Muslim University. The institution offered modern education, including Western science, to Muslims. The Aligarh movement, as it was known, had an enormous impact in the area of educational reforms. The Singh Sabha movement. Reform organizations of the Sikhs, the first Singh Sabhas, were formed at Amritsar in 1873 and at Lahore in 1879. The Sabhas sought to rid Sikhism of superstitions, caste distinctions, and practices seen by them as non-Sikh. They promoted education among the Sikh, often combining modern instruction with Sikh teachings. So this was the reading of our second part of 7th chapter, Women, Caste and Reform. If you have any doubt or query, you can ask me in the comment section below. Also, you can find the links to other part and other chapters in the description box below. Thank you everyone.